Welcome back to a new lecture. Now, this lecture is very informative and we're going to talk about a lot of sensitive topics because I want to talk about how to deal with addictive habits. Now, some of you might have some addictive habits that are a bit more problematic than others. However, there are solutions. And if you try what I'm going to tell you and you try, the different exercises and methods that I talk about in this course and they don't seem to work, you might want to consider seeking personal professional help. But I want to reassure you that the systems I want to talk to you about are systems that I've used with a lot of people and they worked. They worked wonders and people changed their lives. So if you really take those systems and take a decision that you want to make a change, you can definitely make it happen. We're going to go through different parts. We're going to kind of dissect the addictive habits into the different elements of it so you get a good understanding of what habits are and how they form and how they creep out on you and how you keep, relapsing. And we're also going to talk about some effective methods on how to deal with those addictive habits. Now, you got to understand that every habit that turns into an addiction, it becomes an anchored reaction linked to your subconscious brain in the form of neural pathways. And one of the main reasons why a habit can easily turn into an addiction is because it's usually linked to high levels of pleasure deriving from the trigger, the routine, and of course the reward. And that's something really important to note out. People tend to think that we get the satisfaction when we get the reward, but that's not entirely true. You do get a satisfaction out of the reward, but as soon as you are exposed to the stimulus, when your subconscious brain anticipates the pleasurable reward, your brain starts releasing dopamine, which is the biggest contributing factor in anchoring the addiction. A lot of people, when they hear about dopamine, they say, oh, it's the happy hormone. It's not just the happy hormone. It's also the hormone that is mainly responsible for your sense of motivation. When you want to do something and you feel high levels of dopamine in your body when thinking about that thing, this will give you motivation to go and seek it. So, the trigger is a very important part of what we're going to talk about because when people are trying to get rid of the habit, they always focus on dealing with the reward. They focus on emphasizing how bad the reward is and what it's costing them, and that's good. This can be effective. This can be a good way to do it. And in my experience, I've seen that when it comes to specifically addictive habits, it's a bit more complex than that. That dealing with the reward itself is not enough, and that the trigger is usually the problem. So if you think you have an addictive habit and you've tried to stop it in the past, what happened when you tried to stop? And this is very important. That's an important idea to keep in mind, that when you get exposed to the trigger and don't react by following the addictive habit cycle, you will start feeling high levels of discomfort as your brain has associated the habit with a basic need for survival oftentimes. And your subconscious brain will then trick you and try to convince you as hard as possible until you relapse and fall back into the addictive cycle, because that's how our brain works. You want to embrace pleasure and move away from discomfort. So when you encounter a trigger, what happens is your brain will release high levels of dopamine in anticipation for the reward. And then you say, no, I'm not going to do it. And then your subconscious brain gets confused. Your sense of motivation gets confused, and you will start feeling discomfort. You'll start feeling like what you're doing is wrong. And then your subconscious brain will start to trick you into relapsing. You'll start having thoughts. You'll talk to yourself. You'll be like, hey, you know what? It's okay. Like just this one time, one last time. It's going to be okay. I can handle it. And before you know it, you relapsed and you go back into the same addictive habit, into the same cycle, into the same loop. That's how it works. And that's why it's particularly hard to overcome habits when they get to the point of addiction. They get to the point of addiction when your brain confuses what you need for survival and what you need for mere pleasure. Now, with this representation or illustration, I'm going to walk you through the elements of addiction and what's important for you to do. If you just want to get information out of this lecture, then it's fine. You can just listen to me and follow along. But if you think you have an addictive habit, you might want to copy this representation, maybe take a screenshot of it, and then recreate one your own with the addictive habit that you think you have. So, the elements of addictions. And usually, we're going to start with abstinence. Now, this is the moment where you said, never again, I'm done, I don't want to do this anymore. And let's take some habits as examples. Let's take drugs as an example and take porn, masturbation, or sex in general as an addiction. So you sit down one day and you figure out that this is a problem, that it's ruining your life, that it's costing you a lot. And you say, never again, I'm done. I don't want to do drugs anymore. I don't want to, watch any kind of pornography or sexual content, or I don't want to be driven only by my sexual instinct. Never again, I'm done. This is it. It's over. And then 2 hours later, you get a trigger. And it's really important for you to identify the triggers. It can be an event. It can be an emotional state. It can be some kind of stimulant. So what happens? What triggers you? Where are you when you get the triggers? How are you feeling when you get the trigger? Who are you with? These are all factors that are important for you to take into consideration. And if you're not really sure what I mean by triggers, or you're not really sure how to identify yours, go back to the habit formation lecture and the habit loop lectures where I talk more in details about those if you don't remember them. But basically, it's important, it's crucial to figure out what the triggers are. And I can tell you right now that what I found out, and this is a system that I created, and what I found out, this is the most revolutionary thing that I think I've ever done in my work so far, is that people always focused on dealing with the wrong part of the addiction. That people focused on the reward and the routine, the habit itself, instead of focusing on the triggers. And you'll understand in a few minutes why this research was revolutionary and how it helped a lot of people. But following the trigger, what happens is you start the temptation. Well, of course, once you have a trigger, if you don't stop it there, you're going to start falling into the cycle. So you say, I'm going to do it one last time. I'm going to do drugs one last time. I'm going to watch porn or go have, a crazy intercourse with a random person only one last time, that it will feel amazing and that you're craving it so bad. You'll start having those thoughts that just push you to do it. They kind of convince you. You'll have thoughts in your brain, and you need to be aware of those. You will have thoughts in your brain that will kind of tempt you and tell you that it's going to be okay, that it's going to be the best thing ever, just one last time, that you have control, until you get to the first action. You get to the first action, and you say, just a little bit. I'm just going to watch a bit of sexual content. I'm just going to do a little bit of drugs, one last time only, and you take the first action. And when you do, you went into the indulging phase. You indulge, right? And then you start with a bit, with the first action, and then you do it more and more. And you say, I can handle it. It's not the end of the world. Tomorrow I'll stop for good. It's important to be aware of those ideas because they are trying to trick you to satisfy the happy hormones and the motivational hormones in your system that are messed up. Because that's what happens when you're addicted to a habit. Your brain structure and your brain chemicals get messed up. So that's why it's happening. Until you get to the point of defeat. You did it fully, maybe worse than before. Sometimes when you abstain and you don't do an addictive habit for 3 or 4 days and then you relapse, it tends to be even a bit harsher than what it was before. And then you failed again. And it's hard to resist. And then you feel guilty and ashamed. Or maybe you even feel happy and satisfied, but at the same time you want to stop. And this is dangerous, because if after doing the habit, you still feel that that was amazing, that it was a good experience, that it brought you a lot of pleasure, you are reaffirming the addictive habit. You are reinforcing it and feeding it to grow stronger. Until you get to the point where you realize again that it's costing you a lot, that, I don't want to do this anymore, and then you go back into the abstinence phase. And it's a loop. You keep going through the same phases over and over and over again. So, now that I explained it to you a bit, let me give you an example. Let me give you two examples. So, abstinence, first, let's start with pornography and sex addiction. You realize at one point that it's a problem, that it's costing you a lot, that you want to stop, and you say, never again, I'm done. And then you get a trigger. You're on Instagram and you see an Instagram model that looks really attractive, right? This can be a trigger. It can. And then you get triggered. This is the event. And you get into a certain emotional state and you feel a certain stimulant. And then you start having thoughts that are tempting you to go have sex with someone, or to masturbate, or to, start watching some sexual content or pornography. One last time, that it would feel amazing, that you're craving it, and then you do. You start, but the first action is usually, you don't immediately start with the sexual act. You start by texting someone, or calling someone, or maybe touching yourself, rubbing yourself, whatever it is, right? You start with the first action, and usually when people get to the first action, it's hard to stop. I've done a bunch of research, and most people tell me that once they got to the first action, they usually fail to hold it. Unless you have a lot of discipline and a lot of willpower, and most people don't, and you don't have to, because I'll tell you why in a second. Once they do the first action, they indulge, and then they're defeated all the way back to abstinence. Same thing goes with drugs. You say, never again, I'm done, and then something triggers you. You're with a bunch of your friends who usually, they do some sort of drugs, and that triggers you, and they ask you, hey, do you want some? And then the temptation, you're going to be like, well, I'm just with my friends right now, like it's going to be fun, it's going to be okay, I'll just do it socially, and then you do it. This is the temptation. And then you do the first action. You take a puff or whatever you do, whatever kind of drugs it is, you take the first action, you say yes. That's the first action. You say yes, right? And then you indulge, and then you're defeated, and then you go back to abstinence. So it's important for you to draw out your own map, your own representational system of the addictive habit that you have, for you to get a better understanding of what's happening. Now, assuming that you're going to pause the video or wait till afterwards to do your representation if you have an addictive habit, I want to talk about how to overcome it. Now, there are several things we can do to overcome an addiction. But first, you need to know that depending on how severe the addiction is, this is a process that takes time. If you relapse, it doesn't mean that you failed. You only fail when you stop trying. I've had a lot of people who would email me saying that they relapsed again and they don't think that they can do it. And I just simply say to them, try again. And again and again until you do it. Because if you know that it's costing you a lot, if you know that this addictive habit is something that's ruining your life, for example, and you want to get rid of it, you don't stop trying after you fail once or twice. You really don't stop trying until you overcome it. And with the resources you have in this course, your battle is going to be a lot easier. So you might lose a battle, but as long as you keep trying, you can win the war. And that's what we're focusing on. It's not easy to aim for perfection. Sometimes it's better if you go on one step at a time. As long as you see progress, you're on the right track. And this falls back into the consistency rate that I talked about often in this course. This is a system that can work. When you have consistency rate, you can see progress. And second off, you need to understand your addiction properly. And this ties back to the representation that I just talked about. All the elements in the previous presentation are steps that you will go through when handling an addiction. When you understand all the separate elements of your addiction separately, you'll have way better control over it, because your conscious brain is now aware of those elements, and you can kind of direct your conscious awareness towards them and deal with the problem while you still can before you indulge into the first action. And third off, you need to be aware of your subconscious brain trying to trick you into falling back in the addiction cycle. If not, you will not see it coming, and you'll convince yourself to fall into it again and again and again. So when the trigger hits and you start having those urges, be very well aware of what kind of justification your subconscious brain is trying to give you to fall back into the addictive habit again, and take a conscious decision not to listen. Observe, accept what your subconscious brain is saying, but make sure that you give yourself a decision that you are in control, that you will not listen to those. And as you understand those elements, let's dive a bit deeper into solutions. So these are 4 different methods that I've tried with a lot of my clients, and they worked. I'm talking about this topic because I know it might be something very important for a lot of you, and those methods, they work. If you really apply them properly and you use them, they can work. And if you are in my advanced course and those are not working for you, make sure to check out the resources I have in the neuro-linguistic programming section that will talk more about them. But if you're just in my basic habits course, you can also take those and get a lot of benefits out of them. So first off, handling the triggers. One of the most effective ways to break an addiction is to start deassociating the anticipated pleasure or comfort when you encounter the triggers. And you can apply the NLP anchoring techniques or switch pattern to do that. And those are 2 neurolinguistic programming techniques that I talked about in this course. Whether you're in my advanced course or in my basic habits course, I did talk about those and you can use them. Instead of waiting till you fully relapse and feel guilty or ashamed, try to bring this end result and connect it to the trigger. Remember when I was telling you that this was the biggest pivoting moment in my career, in my research, is when I figured this out. When I was studying addiction and I had a bunch of pieces of paper in front of me, I was writing down information and drawing representations, trying to understand what's happening, and I realized that people are dealing with the wrong part of the addiction. That people are dealing with the addiction itself. People are dealing with the reward, making us feel that the reward is horrible when subconsciously you'll love it. And that's not how it works. It's not how it works. And then I was like, well, if you can't really heal an addiction with focusing on those 2 parts, that leaves us with the trigger. It's the trigger that starts everything. It's the trigger that starts the cycle. And if we can deal with the trigger, then you can literally break the chain. And this is where it got interesting. So what I did with a lot of people is I used the anchoring technique and swish pattern, and even sometimes just talking to them about it so they can take a conscious effort to apply what I'm saying. And what you'll do is that you will start, you'll visualize yourself as soon as you identify the triggers, all right? You take a conscious decision to link those triggers to discomfort, to negative emotions. You know what you feel during abstinence? That you never want to do it again, that you're done. Well, why do you feel that? What's the reason? There's a lot of negative emotional responses that are taking place when you're saying to yourself, never again, I'm done, right? And you don't have to wait till after you get defeated or after you relapse to introduce those feelings, because if you do it then, it's not really helpful. But if you can take those feelings and emotions and the motivation that you have behind them, behind why you want to stop, and you link those to the trigger, this can be a game changer, not just with addictive habits, but with any kind of habit that you have. And I'll give you a quick example for you to understand it better. I had one of my clients who was severely addicted to pornography and masturbation. And, he would sometimes do it 3-4 times a day. And it was obviously costing him a lot of energy, a lot of time. And it was affecting his sexual life and increasing his anxiety. And I started asking him more about the habit. And we started focusing on the trigger. I said, look, as soon as we identified the triggers, I said, as soon as you get those triggers, what I want you to do is first I want you to memorize. I want you to memorize really well what you feel when you say to yourself, I'm done. I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to keep going on with this habit. I'm done. Memorize exactly what emotional state you feel and then anchor it. Use the anchoring technique. And if you're, no matter in what course you're in, you can go back to the applicable section, or if you didn't get to it yet, you're going to get to it in the applicable section where I talk about anchoring techniques, and you anchor those emotions that you feel when you stop. You anchor those to the stimulus or to the triggers that basically let you unfold this cycle of addictive habit. You can also use the swish pattern, and I used both of them with him, and he overcame the problem. Like, NLP works instantly. When it works instantly. And as soon as we did a few sessions, I think it was the third or fourth session, that was it. He was done with the problem, like for life. That's it, right? This is how powerful this method is. And the swish pattern is basically, and again, if you didn't get to it yet, you're going to get to it soon in the applicable sections. You will change your emotional state and your behavioral reaction when you encounter those triggers. So that's why it's important. It's crucial for you to identify the triggers, because if you don't, you're not going to be able to use this method. And sometimes you might not be able to cover all the triggers at once. That's why I'm saying it's a continuous progress. It's a continuous process. Once you relapse, then you can identify what triggered you this time and then write it down and then use the method on it. And you relapse again and you keep doing it until you covered all the triggers and you dealt with all the triggers, and then there's nothing left to basically push you back into falling back into the addictive habit. Now, the second thing is changing your perspective on defeat. See, usually when people fail and fall back into the addiction, they tend to stress out about it and they start feeling negative overall. And this kind of behavior will only reinforce the habit. You need to be very selective when it comes to the emotional state you're in when you fail. If you start beating yourself up for it, your subconscious brain will perceive that as you being weak and vulnerable towards the habit, which would reinforce the relapses. Just think about it. When you relapse, if you look down on yourself and you look at yourself as if you're weak and broken, your subconscious brain is soaking in those information, and this will reinforce the habit. This will make the temptation way easier. But if you say to yourself, it's fine, I accept it, I got defeated, but I'm going to get back up and try again, that I'm going to try my best not to allow this to happen again, your subconscious brain will perceive you as strong, as somebody who has more discipline and more control, and that you're less vulnerable towards the temptation. And this is how you start seeing progress. And I can tell you right now, the majority of people I talk to and I ask them, well, how do you feel after you relapse? And they go like, oh, I feel like shit. I felt ashamed. I felt disappointment, this and that. And I'm like, well, no wonder you've been stuck with the habit. You've been beating yourself up. You've been holding yourself down and talking down on yourself. Of course, you're not going to be able to overcome it. And be very aware if this is something that you're doing. I'm sorry, my voice is cutting up a bit. I've been speaking a lot. But following with tracking your progress and consistency is also important. And I did talk about this before. I'm not going to talk about it a lot anymore. I know it's been a long lecture, 24 minutes so far. But as I said before, the goal is not perfection, it's consistency. So keep track of that addiction and notice the improvement you're experiencing. Lastly, and I do want to talk a lot more about this, is that relapse and rewards is an important part of the cycle. You want to find something else that can fill the spot of the addiction and keep your mind busy. Because if you're just sitting there doing nothing, you're bored out of your brain and you're stressed out, your brain is going to scan your environment. And when your brain scans the environment, the first thing that's going to come into your head is the habit, the addictive habit. And this is where you can easily get tempted again to fall back into it. But if you keep your mind busy and you replace the addiction with another habit that you've been always wanting to do, something that brings you joy, fulfillment, a happy experience, whatever it is. Pick a habit. In the example I gave you beforehand of the client of mine who was addicted to pornography and masturbation, we basically replaced it with fitness. So I said, every time you feel it, every time you feel the triggers or whatever, and you feel like you're tempting yourself and you're about to lose control, replace the habit. Do something else. Do 10 push-ups. Go for a run. Do some sit-ups. Do a plank. Do whatever. Like, I'm not saying go work out for an hour, because you might get triggers, several times a day. But just do a little habit that shifts your minds elsewhere. And make sure you reinforce your progress by rewarding yourself. When you reach certain milestones, when you reach a certain goal, when you keep up with a certain consistency level, make sure you reward yourself. Make sure that you get into this with a mindset that you need to stop. If you, and look, this is important. Most people have this problem. They don't really want to stop. They think they want to stop, but deep down they're enjoying it and they don't really see how it's hurting them. They would like to stop one day, but they don't really need to stop. There's a difference between you wanting to stop and you needing to stop. You gotta need to stop. You gotta have this need, this urge to stop and say, I'm done, and be mad about it. Be mad about it. Careful, don't be stressed about it. Don't be stressed about it. Be mad about it as in you're mad because you know you deserve better. You have higher standards, you believe in yourself, and you want better for yourself, and that's why you're mad, right? Find and reinforce the motivational purpose-based elements to help you during those tough times. Keep focusing on your purpose, on your motivation. Why are you trying to stop? Why do you want to overcome the habit? When the hard times come, and they're going to come by the truckloads, you need to think about those elements. Your purpose, your motivation, your reason, why you want it to stop, and what it's going to cost you if you don't. This is me. When I talked about handling the triggers, it's one thing to anchor a negative state to the triggers, but it's also another thing to also anchor this inspirational mental state and mindset when you overcome the trigger. Because then you will be pushing yourself to more success, to do more, to try more. And by now, I think you guys had enough information. It's been almost a 30-minute lecture. I know it's been long, but for those of you who are dealing with addiction, I promise you, you can take those methods and you can apply them and you can change your life. I've seen it happen right before my eyes. You just need to believe in yourself, all right? And do everything I told you about. If there's some things that you missed out on and you have an addictive habit and you want to overcome it, you might want to go through this lecture again. It's worth it. Even if it's 30 minutes, going through a 30-minute lecture twice is better than you relapsing over and over again and feeling like you're hopeless and you can't do anything about it. These are systems that can help you, and I'm here to help you. So please do yourself a favor and don't let it go. If you have an addictive habit, start dealing with it today, now, before tomorrow. All right? And I really hope you guys enjoyed this lecture. I know my voice cracked up a bit during some parts of it, but I'm pretty sure you guys got the information. And I'll see you all in the next one.